Hello everyone, this is Tyrell, and I'm going to be walking you through the process of how I sculpted a buffalo. Maybe you could tell by the skeleton. And I started out with a wire armature. And you're probably wondering what this buffalo represents. If you are a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you may have seen this movie, Ephraim's Rescue, and it's actually a very cool story about a pioneer that rescued the pioneers that were on the trail. Here we can see that I am related to Ephraim K. Hanks. He's my fourth great grandfather, and learning about him has been a really amazing experience for me. I've done some research, and I'd like to relay some quotes as I go about sculpting. Here I'm just putting the aluminum foil to bulk out the armature, and let's get into the story. So Ephraim K. Hanks was an early saint of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he received a revelation to go and to help the still traveling handcart companies that were coming later in the season around fall when snow starts coming down. And he shoots a buffalo in this process and gives it to the starving pioneers and helps them along their way to Utah. So here are a few of the quotes that I found interesting from my research and help give a little bit of insight about this amazing experience. So Ephraim K. Hanks, the first part, talked about he had a revelatory experience, and here's what he says. One night after returning to sleep at someone's house. He says, being somewhat fatigued after the day's journey, I retired to rest quite early, and while I still lay wide awake in my bed, I heard a voice calling me by name, and then saying, the handcart people are in trouble, and you are wanted. Will you go and help them? I turned instinctively in the direction from whence the voice came, and beheld an ordinary-sized man in the room. Without any hesitation, I answered, yes, I will go if I am called. I then turned around to go to sleep, but had laid only a few minutes when the voice called a second time, repeating almost the same words as on the first occasion. My answer was the same as before. This was repeated a third time. He then later goes to Salt Lake, and Brigham Young calls for a rescue party to be sent to the handcart companies. Here it says, the call was made for volunteers to go out and help the last handcart companies in. When some of the brethren responded by explaining that they could get ready to start in a few days, I spoke out at once, saying, I am ready now. The next day I was wending my way eastward over the mountains with a light wagon all alone. Now, Ephraim K. Hanks wasn't all alone during his journey out to rescue the handcart pioneers. He was accompanied by a few other people, but for when he went out hunting or scouting, sometimes I'm sure he would do it alone. So right here I'm bulking out the musculature of the bison that I'm sculpting. And back to the quotes. Here Ephraim K. Hanks talks about a bull buffalo that he shot, and this is different from the buffalo that he shot and gave to the handcart companies. But he says, I camped in the snow in the mountains. As I was preparing to make a bed in the snow with the few articles that my pack animal carried for me, I thought how comfortable a buffalo robe would be on such an occasion, and also how I could relish a little buffalo meat for supper, and before lying down for the night, I was instinctively led to ask the Lord to send me a buffalo. Now, I am a firm believer in the efficacy of prayer, for I have on many different occasions asked the Lord for blessings, which He in His mercy has bestowed on me. But when I, after praying as I did on that lonely night in the South Pass, looked around me and spied a buffalo bull within 50 yards of my camp, my surprise was complete. He continues by saying, early the next morning, I was on my way again and soon reached what is known as the Ice Springs Bench. There I happened upon a herd of buffalo and killed a nice cow. I was impressed to do this, although I did not know why until a few hours later. But the thought occurred to my mind that the hand of the Lord was in it, as it was a rare thing to find a buffalo herd around that place at this late part of the season. According to Paul's account, Asa and Hanks traveled together from Green River and on the 10th of November made camp early in the day, presumably to rest the mules. Asa stayed with the wagons and teams, and Ephraim went to hunt a buffalo. Ephraim succeeded in shooting a buffalo, skinning it, and loading his pack horse with meat, a remarkable feat. So, this is the buffalo that Ephraim K. Hanks eventually gives to the Martin Handcart Company, and this is an image of that event and how the pioneers received him. I'm going to go into quotes about this. He says, I spied something in the distance that looked like a black streak in the snow. As I got near to it, I perceived it moved. Then I was satisfied that this was the long-looked-for Handcart Company, led by Captain Edward Martin. I reached the ill-fated train just as the immigrants were camping for the night. The sight that met my gaze as I entered their camp can never be erased from my memory. The starved forms and haggard countenances of the poor sufferers as they moved about, slowly shivering with cold, to prepare their scanty evening meal, was enough to touch the stoutest heart. When they saw me coming, they hailed me with joy inexpressible, and when they further beheld the supply of fresh meat I brought into camp, their gratitude knew no bounds. Flocking around me, one would say, "Oh, please, give me a small piece of meat." Another would exclaim, "My poor children are starving, do give a little." And children with tears in their eyes would call out, "Give me some, give me some." At first I tried to wait on them and handed out the meat as they called for it, but finally I told them to help themselves. 5 minutes later, both my horses had been released of their extra burden. The meat was all gone, and the next few hours found the people in camp busily engaged in cooking and eating it with thankful hearts. I thought it was very interesting that the pioneers were so kind and even though they were starving, didn't just assume that the food was for them and were asking, "Can I have a little piece, a small piece, please?" Hanks later learns that a prophecy had been made by one of the brethren that the company should feast on buffalo meat when their provisions might run short. My arrival in their camp loaded with meat was the beginning of the fulfillment of that prediction, but only the beginning, as I afterwards shot and killed a number of buffalo for them as we journeyed along. This shows how faithful the pioneer saints were as they moved along, always looking forward to the positive things that were in their path, that eventually they would get food and eventually they would get past their trials and sufferings. So now on my sculpture I'm applying a base coat of this brown as kind of an underlayer for the later colors and textures applied. After Ephraim K. Hanks and Asa unite with the saints and join them for the rest of their journey home, they administered to a lot of the sick and the frostbitten pioneers. says, I spent days going from tent to tent, administering to the sick. Truly the Lord was with me, and others of his servants who labored faithfully together with me in that day of trial and suffering. The result of this labor of love certainly redounded to the honor and glory of a kind and merciful God. In scores of instances, when we administered to the sick and rebuked the diseases in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, the sufferers would rally at once. They were healed almost instantly. I believe I administered to several hundreds in a single day, and I could give names of many whose lives were saved by the power of God. Here he talks more about how some of the frostbitten limbs and appendages were cleaned with a soap until they would fall off, and then they would cut away the skin. And it's just a kind of a gruesome thought, but knowing what the pioneers suffered helps you have a greater appreciation for the things that they went through. Now with my bison, I'm applying a black wash. It's kind of a watered down dark mixture of paint to get into the cracks and the scratches that I put in to simulate fur. And this is kind of give like a darker undertone for the fur. And then after applying the black wash, I take a paper towel and dry off the surfaces that are more exterior to take away some of that dark pigment. So this has been one of the stories of my fourth great grandfather, Ephraim K. Hanks, and he was a great man, willing to act on whatever promptings he received and to do so swiftly. Years later, I'm reading this quote, years later in a letter to Wilford Woodruff, Hinckley suggested that Hanks might be a good candidate to serve with him in his mission among the American Indians in Arizona. I believe with such a man as Ephraim Hanks, if we were as well united in faith and feelings as we were when we were out to meet the Martin Handcart Company, that we would be willing to keep going south and preach to the remaining Indian tribes. This has been a great study of Ephraim K. Hanks and the kind of man that he was in order to provide this kind of help to the suffering pioneers. And here are my sources. Thanks for watching.